Welcome back to the Cream City Club podcast. I am Spencer Michaelis. I'm here again with Gunnar Amelunk. Gunnar, I already asked you during the Bucks episode, but I'm going to do it again just to make sure we're on the same page. How are you doing tonight?
Yeah, I'm doing good. We did say we'll go short in the Bucks episode.
And we didn't.
We did not do that. And this one, we're not promising we'll go short. We're going to go normal length, so we'll probably go long. So that's how it goes.
Yep. Yep. We didn't record on Tuesday because my voice was kind of messed up. So we're doing both anyway. Might as well make them full length at this point. Whatever.
Yeah, we're having
Um,
fun.
yeah. Yeah. If you are listening and you haven't yet subscribed, please take a moment to do so on whatever platform you are listening on and to rate us 5 stars. Follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod to stay up to date on these new episode releases. And like I kind of hinted at today, this episode is going to be focused on the Brewers. So I guess we're going to start with something that actually isn't super related to the Brewers, but Shohei Ohtani. We haven't really talked about this yet. His deal that he signed, his 10-year, $700 million deal, where he will be paid 10 years, $20 million over the course of these 10 years that he's actually playing for the Dodgers. So we'll get, for those who don't know, I'm sure everyone who is listening to this Brewers podcast knows what happened with the Ohtani deal, but basically $68 million of each year's salary is being deferred to the 10 years that follow these 10 years that he is going to be under contract with the Dodgers. And there are some other weird stipulations in the contract, including that if the GM leaves the job or gets fired, Shohei has the right to opt out at the end of that year. And it's an interesting deal. I guess first thing we should talk about, Gunnar, you think this is a good thing or a bad thing for baseball and MLB as a whole?
I think the contract and just the fact that it got so much exposure is good for baseball. And I know you're heated about the deferrals, and I don't know if you're necessarily the thing about that too for me, it's ridiculous as like a fan aspect of it. You're like, come on, like there was a hole like in the Dodgers were able to squeak out a hole in the
Oh yeah.
system and be able to pull it off. Like, come on, you gotta be kidding me. But also, it's like kudos to them. They figured out a way to do it. Like they just took advantage of the rules, and they were able to get away with it. So, you can't be mad at that. You can't be mad at Shohei. Like I would love that if I'm just set for life and I get all this money and I could just have that guaranteed. Um, I mean, yeah, we'll leave it at that part. For what do you think? Is it good for baseball or not? Before we tie it into the Brewers, but what do you think? 'Cause I know you got your own. Do
Yeah.
you think maybe those, as far as maybe I'm trying to forget what I don't know if it's like collective bargaining agreement. Is that kind of what it is for baseball too?
Yeah, it's
Like,
the
do you think that
CBA.
that'll
Yeah.
change? Yeah, okay. I didn't know if it's the same for like NBA, but do you think that'll like change now in the next one if they're gonna like get rid of like this deferral thing that the people have discovered with like the Padres and whatnot?
I do. I do think they're going to. The tough part with it is that there is going to be an argument in favor of keeping it, and that is that the value of money declines as time goes on, and that's the reason that we'll get more into the deferral part of it in a minute. But I think it's bad for baseball because it just gave a big market another advantage. And to me, I'm not a proponent of the salary cap. I don't think baseball needs one. I do think baseball should have a salary floor. I think they need to implement some sort of floor, and this will never happen, but better revenue sharing is how you would create better competitive balance. People talk about how the NBA and Bucks owners and all these people spend money better than like Mark and the Brewers. The revenue sharing difference in the NBA and MLB is humongous. The Bucks make a bunch of money just because the league makes a bunch of money. The Brewers do not get that same type of thing. The Brewers TV deal is like a tenth of what the Dodgers is. The Dodgers can afford to pay these players strictly off of the TV deal that they signed for the rights to broadcast their games. The Brewers have Bally, who might not even be paying the Brewers moving forward, and it's for about a tenth of what the Dodgers are getting. The Brewers TV deal is why stretching the budget for Andrew McCutchen is a bit of an exaggeration, but actually somewhat on the table too. So for me, the deal itself, I don't think it's bad for baseball. I wouldn't say it's good for baseball. I can't stand the people who are like, this is great because he's going to get a ton of attention playing for the Dodgers and the big,
Yeah, that means
like,
nothing anymore.
no, it shouldn't, but we keep trying to make
No.
it mean something. again, we can tie it even to a Bucks thing that we've already talked about, but Giannis has no issue getting sponsorships or recognition or anything playing in Milwaukee. If you are good, people will know about you, people will care about you, and people will want to watch you. And it does not matter what city you play in. It doesn't. Now, with a lot of these players that come over from Asia, they do like being on the West Coast because it has a lot more of like a Japanese type heritage there. Like there are people who they can feel more comfortable in that type of area, and that's why you see a lot of them signing there. When you offer 700 million and you can offer that, yeah, he's going to sign there, and you can't blame him for that. So like you said, this is not a Dodgers problem or a Shohei problem. It's a CBA problem that I bet they'll try and get figured out in this next one. But I guess kind of along these lines, what does this say about the Brewers' chances of ever keeping up with these bigger markets? What are your thoughts on that?
You nailed it with, I think there is a clear problem. I don't know how necessarily to fix it, but there's just too big of a disadvantage, I think. And that's, I know you're not a proponent for the salary cap, and I'm not necessarily a proponent of it either. It's just, it feels like we just don't, and I'll get to my next point. I don't think we have a chance to not compete with them because, again, we've talked about it like on the Jack episode, like the Diamondbacks are like, and they can pay people, so that's a bad example. But like teams that you don't really expect to win, you had a great tweet, I think, like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, or whatever it was, when this first started to break about like the Yankees and Dodgers have won Disney World Series since since like 2009 or whatever when the Yankees won with
Yep.
CC. So then you can say two, but like, and that's over 15 years. So these guys who get the freedom to go out and spend doesn't necessarily mean you win, but also it sucks for like the Brewers where it's like we enjoy doing it the quote unquote hard way, but we gotta like, I mean, I know you love it because you gotta nerd out about prospects and draft picks, and it makes everything a lot more exciting rather than having to just be like, oh, we can just go out and get Shohei, and then we don't have to worry about the money or anything. Um, we were scared like when we were signing that Yelich contract. At least I was like, ooh, is this gonna like nip us in the butt in like 4 years? Like, what if he's not like an all-star level player? And we'll get to Yelich in a second. But like, we have to overthink like all of our contracts. Like the Cubs can just have Jason Hayward sucking in right field offensively and great defensive player, but like they don't have to think about like, is he worth the money that we paid him? Like he's just gonna fit. Like you don't have to even second guess it. Where we would have to like be sweating and like give up prospects to get off of him to make our financial situation work. So it's a good idea with the floor too, like you're making teams spend. Um, but yeah, I think that's just the tough part for me is I don't know what the answer is. I just feel like there's such a big clear difference. Like if in the NBA, like we would have the chance to sign. Everyone's got the same salary cap, so this is where the salary cap is. But for people, I guess, who don't know, like we would have the same chance to sign like LeBron if like we all had like freedom. Like if everyone had their cap cleared, like it wouldn't matter. Like LeBron could get the same amount of money here that he could get in LA. Like we would have that opportunity to bring him in here. Would he actually do it? No, I mean, there's other stuff like his fight, like deals and stuff outside of the NBA, like NBA contract that LA makes more sense, and like taxes and stuff if you went to Texas or something. But like we have a fighting chance. Do we actually get him? No, probably not. But I just don't think we have a fighting chance with the Brewers as far as guys go. And
No.
like we do we care necessarily? Sort of, but like I said, we enjoy probably just because we grew up in small market. We enjoy that part of baseball where we have to make trades and nerd out about like prospects who's going to actually work out and stuff. But it's just frustrating, like I said, in that aspect. So I don't know what the answer is, but I just think there probably needs to be some sort of solution to make that gap closer, I guess.
Yeah. No, and I did point out like you said with tweet like those teams haven't been winning World Series. It's not like these guys go win the World Series every year, but they do compete almost every year. They're in the hunt almost every year strictly because they can just sign people and put themselves in the hunt by doing that. So there's absolutely an advantage. My point in baseball is that if you can get into the playoffs, you can win the World Series. And I know some people don't agree with that, but it is 100% what I believe. So for me, small markets will always have a legitimate chance without needing the exact same type of like even playing field in terms of money, just because of the way the game works itself. But when you talk about these deferrals, and I just want to get into that more, to me, that is where it starts becoming a bigger advantage for big markets that small markets just don't have. And so Otani's getting 70 million in average annual value. To me, against your competitive balance tax, that's what it is. It's 70 million. It should be 70 million. I would even be okay if they say deferrals are, we're still doing deferrals, but it works that way and you get the whole amount counted against your tax number. Like that makes sense to me. I think the easiest way is to say no more deferrals, or to put like a cap on deferrals. Like, okay, you can only do 5% of a year. Like your average annual value can be deferred, like something like that. I don't think you should be able to defer 68 out of $70 million. That to me is just absurd.
No.
I think there's plenty of reason for small markets to be upset about this whole situation. But I also think no matter what they did, a lot of these guys are going to end up in these bigger markets regardless. To me, still, and we've talked about it on a different podcast, the big market and the big money thing, if you have that money, to me, it's not as big of an advantage in terms of like, yes, you can sign these free agents, but, and you kind of touched on it, you can take a David Price contract in order to make the Mookie Betts return way smaller. Like the Brewers could not take that David Price contract if they were trying to get Mookie Betts. They would have had to pay that in prospects instead of being able to take a bad contract off of their hands. They can't take that chance on Blake Treinen for $10 million a year as a reliever like the Dodgers can. That type of stuff, you can't risk injury stuff. Like if the Dodgers went out and signed Woodruff tomorrow, that would not shock me, because they can just say, all right, we don't care if we pay him for this next year and he never pitches until the year after. That's worth the risk for us. The Brewers can't afford to do that just because of the way they build their roster. Those to me are the bigger advantages than anything else in terms of like signing free agents. I think for the most part, if free agents want to go somewhere and they're good, every team is genuinely interested in them. And I think if Shohei came to the Brewers and tried to make that same type of deal, they would have tried to find a way to do it. I don't know that they actually could have, but I think they would have tried to figure out a way to do it. And because he's that good, he's worth that much money. He legitimately is. And if you can, and not only that, he's worth that much money in advertising and like all these different things. He brings people to the park. He brings season ticket holders. He does all these different things for the team. Where
to that point, though, not to cut you off, but if it's like if Shohei came to us and said, I want to play for the Brewers, like, but this is what has to happen. That's where the problem is, because if, say, like my LeBron, like we get in 2012, we could have got LeBron James and he said, I want to go to the Milwaukee Bucks. We could make that happen. We wouldn't have to question it. Like we could say, yeah, we'll make it happen. Like because we can pay you the same amount that Cleveland could pay you or whatever back then, Miami. But if Shohei came to us and said that, we would have to have all these extra conversations about, can we afford this? Can we do this? Like, it shouldn't even like if Shohei wants to come here, he should have a chance to come here. That's where it sucks. But
yeah. And I mean, but then in basketball, you can't. It's kind of different because of the way that extensions work and the way that you have less control over players, like a fewer years of control when you draft a player. So a lot of that stuff is meant to even out that issue. Doesn't do it perfectly, but I think when you consider the fact that baseball is more random and you have these other opportunities to win, I think that's where it all kind of starts to even out. I think baseball could be improved. Do not get me wrong, but I don't know that a cap is needed. I do think, I really think, and it would be hard to do the revenue sharing without a cap, honestly, but I do think revenue sharing should become a bigger deal in baseball, and that it should be, but it's not going to. Owners don't want it. The big owners don't want it. And you can't really blame them because it gives them their biggest advantage that they have. So why would they not want to keep that? So I don't know. I think we can probably move on from Shohei here, but just to wrap it up, I mean, this is the best baseball player I've ever seen in my life. He was 100% worth whatever money anybody wanted to give him. I just don't love the actual structure of the deal. And again, not his fault, not the Dodgers' fault, but I think baseball is probably going to try to work a way around this so that we can't just have this continue to happen in the future. You touched on it earlier. We'll jump to this one here. So yesterday, John Heyman reported that he's heard the Blue Jays kind of kicking around the idea of trading for Yelich. It sounded like today he kind of backtracked on that, and he didn't really mean it as like they're super interested in him, that he just thought it was maybe a possibility and that they could look into it. But in your opinion, would that trade make sense for us and for the Blue Jays? Could you see that being on the table if the Blue Jays are interested?
Hmm. No. Um, and I always said, even when we're like in the heat of Yelich not being himself, quote unquote, that yeah, you might run into a situation in a couple years here where and it didn't actually end up being like this because we have so many young guys in our roster where now we can kind of be okay with that salary on our roster, even if he wasn't like an all-star level. But I always said, if he's not an all-star level player and you're paying him that money, just like our last conversation, this is why it ties in good is, well, now you have to start worrying about it. Like, oh no, if has the 700 OPS and like playing bad defense, like we can't really afford this, whatever he's making, probably close to 30, 25, somewhere in there. Like, and I think the other aspect of this quote unquote trade that could be happening is, do you think even if, I mean, Yelich had a good year last year, so I'd assume that they would actually be giving us something back. It's not like you're just trying to get off the contract, but I can't imagine with a guy with like 5, 6, 7 years left, whatever he has left, that we wouldn't have to attach something to make that happen. And maybe you know a little bit more better, but it just feels like we either would get a lighter package for him because of that situation, and he's not like this MVP candidate necessarily, versus we would get a bigger package but have to attach something else to it. Like that's why like Yelich is good enough for me right now where I want to keep him. He's not like a burden. So I and the package wouldn't be good enough for me, but you're the trade guy and the prospects guy. So what do you think if what do you think a return could even be necessarily
Yeah.
if
Well,
we even considered this?
I definitely don't think they would be getting a ton in return. If it required attaching other stuff to move him, I would be 100% out on any
Yeah.
trade of him. Um, if the Blue Jays for some reason came saying, "Hey, we're going to give you Ricky Tiedemann for Yelich," then yeah, I would trade Yelich in that type of trade. But I also don't, like you mentioned, I think he's still helpful. I think there's value to having someone who's had the experience as a very good player on the roster for some of these young guys. I know how much Mitchell and Frelick and Weimer have talked about how I know on publicly Yelich isn't a very outgoing guy, but it seems like he gets along really well with these young guys and tries to help them as they go through it. And while that's not everything, and that's not reason to just pay him $29 million a year to keep him around, if he's productive and he's providing that, you need to at least give me something that's going to for sure help me for me to want to move him in a trade. So that's where I am. Um, I know Heyman also threw out specifically Tyrone Taylor's name for the Jays on Hot Stove today. I'm sure Jays fans were thrilled to hear that after hearing Yelich and Bellinger and Shohei and all these other names. Um, but I could honestly, I mean, that one would make more sense. I could see them being interested in him after losing Kiermaier and just kind of having an opening where somebody who can play center field and at least do it decently and be a decent hitter as well. I could see them being interested in something with that, but I don't know what kind of value you're looking at for Tyrone Taylor in that type of trade. You're probably getting a lottery type of talent. Um, but I don't know. I mean, we you can share your thoughts on that if you want. I don't know if you got anyone
No, I mean,
specifically.
comparatively, yeah, I would prefer Tyrone more. And like you said, I mean, you're getting more of not a flyer, but probably someone of that similar value where he's like, what do you think you're getting back for Tyrone Taylor? Like, yeah, we like him. He's like a fourth outfielder probably in a normal roster. Like, I would do it just to clear up that log jam. And if they can actually give us something that's interesting. But for Yelich too, just to leave off on this part, I think, and I'll have during the season, I'll have plenty of Yelich commentary, I'm sure. But I think he's for after last year, I think he's proven to me that he can be a very good player still if he's healthy. And we saw that we were had the ticking clock, you can call it, all year. We were saying, "Oh my God, is that back injury going to creep up again? Like he's playing really good. Like please don't creep up again. It's August." And then he was playing a ton of games in a row, and we were like, "Oh, like why is he? Can we just give him a break? Like we know it's going to pop up again." We both had back injuries.
Yep.
Probably not even to that extent because I'm sure it's worse when you're in the MLB and you're playing every day and it's just wear and tear constantly. So we were just like, please do not have this pop up again. Then it popped up again. Then that's when you started to see the numbers creep down again. So I guess I would just ask for a little bit more of a break for him, I guess, and to keep him healthy because when he's healthy, he's a very good player and above average player. Which that's what I was scared about going into the year. Is that really a is he still that type of guy? I think he is. I'm not sure he's the MVP type of guy, but I think he is an all-star player if he's healthy. So people just need to remember that more than probably his final stats, which are probably still good. It's just
Yeah.
I think he was even having a lot better year than it even looked by the end of it.
Yeah, I think the 2 weeks he played where he was clearly hurt and then finally sat out and went on the IL, they really killed the numbers. Otherwise, even when he came
Yeah,
back, he hit way. It was a small sample when he came back, but he crushed the ball when he came back for the last like week of the season before the playoffs. So, and he hit well in the playoffs in that 2 game series. So,
true.
um, yeah, I've told my Yelich story before on the podcast, but I've always loved Yelich going back to his Marlins days. So it would hurt to see me traded. I would need a legitimate trade on the table, but I'm not like, no, you can't trade Yelich under any circumstances. It's not that type of situation, but I don't think you just settle for whatever you can get just to get him off the books because I don't think he's worthy of that type of a trade at this point. Um, Speaking of trades, though, the Brewers did make a small one today with the Kansas City Royals. They acquired a right-handed pitcher, Taylor Clarke. He's 30 years old. He was a Diamondback for a few years, and then he spent the last 2 years with the Royals. Funny enough, I actually was looking into him a lot last offseason because I thought he was a pretty interesting like breakout reliever type. And then he had one of the worst seasons of any reliever in baseball this year. So I he kind of has he's got interesting stuff because his fastball hasn't gotten good results at all. But to me, when you look at it, it actually has good ride. It's probably a little too straight, which is why it gets hit. But I think it's an interesting pitch, and I bet the Brewers are going to be able to work with it and probably try and get him to spot it in different areas of the zone. And then his slider and his sweeper are good pitches that get a lot of whiffs. And when he throws them out of the zone, I saw Kurt Hogue tweet this. I want to make sure I get the numbers right, but it was in the 90 something percentile, 91st percentile in out of zone whiff percentage on his slider, but he only threw it out of the zone at a ninth percentile clip. So he was just in the zone with it so often, but whenever he got it out of the zone, people swung and missed at it at one of the highest rates in baseball. The Brewers are smart, the Royals are not. I have a feeling that they're going to be able to figure out how to get him to just use the slider in a better way, get it out of the zone more often, get a bunch more swing and miss and chase. And I think it's an interesting pickup. Now, to touch on what we gave up for him, they gave up a utility infielder, Cam Devaney, who honestly, he's somebody that like I bet you he plays in the major leagues and he might stick in the major leagues a little bit. He's got a pretty nice swing. He can play shortstop, he can play third, he can play second. He played first a decent amount this year. Like he can play all four spots and he can legitimately handle shortstop. So it's not like it's a just a big dude who kind of plays there at times. Like he's solid shortstop. I don't know if he'll ever hit enough to be a real major leaguer, but if you give me a utility role for him for a while, like that wouldn't shock me. So interesting pickup for Kansas City in that regard. But the guy I actually do, I liked him a lot this season. Whenever I watched him, was the right-handed pitcher Ryan Brady, who they gave up in the deal. He was an undrafted guy out of BYU. He sits like mid 90s with his fastball, really good curveball, really good slider, commands solid. I actually viewed him as a guy I thought we might see in the major league pen at some point in 2024. So it wouldn't shock me if that one ends up looking kind of bad in a couple of years just because Brady is pitching well in the Royals pen and it is possible that Clarke doesn't do too much for the Brewers, but we touched on it when we talked about the Jake Bauers, Jay Savina type trade. The Brewers have so much depth, and especially when you're talking about like relief pitcher types, Brewers find those everywhere. They find them undrafted, independent ball. They make a starter or reliever. They can find good relievers anywhere. They sign him to a minor league deal. I mean, they find him all over the place. I'm not worried about losing him, but I do think it's somebody that you could say in a couple of years, like, ooh, would have been nice to have Ryan Brady right now. So I think the Royals did a good job here. They gave up a guy that they probably couldn't fix because they don't know what they're doing. And they got two guys that are potential major league players. So I think it's a decent deal for them. I have no problem with it from the Brewers' perspective. I know, Gunnar, you said you don't really have anything on this one because there's not
No, I'll
much to
just
say
trust you
there.
on this one. I
um,
mean, just off his raw stats, you can tell that he started striking out guys more, but he
yeah,
got worse. So maybe he figured something out where it's just a smaller tweak again, like what we've been saying, beating a dead horse again with the Brewers. But maybe it's just we need a better mix for him or something. Like he clearly has something in the tank now. He figured something out to strike more guys out.
yeah.
Um, And that's with him, like you said, with the Royals being dumb. So if we can actually tweak something and actually make it, I don't know, valuable for us, then yeah, I could see this actually being fine. And we talk about trades all the time, and you said it. Like this is just a flyer to me again. Like we have so many guys where, again, like people just look at the raw stats, like I just pointed out, and say, "Oh, he had a big ERA, classic Brewers." Where you're getting a guy like this. What do you think he's going to help out? Like yeah, I get it. Like he good chance he might suck. Like I don't know. But like I'll take the chance that if there's something there that he could actually be something more. So yeah, the more how to change him and stuff. So that's why I like listening to you talk because I just have the stupid answer of that.
No, but I mean you're right. It's what did people say when we got Bryce Wilson last year? I remember when that trade broke, it was just a cash trade. Everyone was like, "What's the point of this?" Bryce Wilson was one of the more important relievers who was healthy all year, who played a bunch of different roles. He helped the team out.
And a top prospect too at one point, which was
Yeah,
even more like that's
yeah,
even the best case flyer where you can get a guy with talent and bring him in,
right.
proven talent.
Yeah, and Elvis Peguero had bad numbers with the Angels out of the pen, and he had a very solid season. The Brewers know what they're doing when they acquire these guys. Not all of them are going to hit, but for the most part, they know what they're looking for and how they can adjust somebody's repertoire and their approach, and they can make them a much better pitcher than they were before. And like we said, there's a lot to kind of see in terms of like there were already signs of a potential breakout the last couple of years, some regression this year, but in terms of pitching development, I think there's an old saying, or I heard Jeff Teague say it, but he kind of just went from the outhouse to the penthouse with pitching development. So I think the Brewers could be, if you go to the Brewers and you need to figure something out, they usually figure it out for you. So as long as you're willing to listen and learn, like you're probably going to make some improvements. So not a huge trade, but somebody that you could see impacting the team. I guess I should note he does have minor league options, so or at least one minor league option, so he doesn't have to be on the major league roster all season, which is pretty important considering they don't have many non-optionable players in the pen right now.
Yeah.
So good that he can at least kind of be part of the shuttle going up and down. Um, we did hear about one other team that kind of joined the mix for Corbin Burns, um, the Angels, because the Angels never know when to just let's rebuild. Nope, we got to do something. And boy, trading for 1 year of Corbin Burns would be just prototypical Los Angeles Angels. But I guess I know from a prospect standpoint, they just don't have anything that I would be super interested in. The guys that I would be interested in are already in the majors and part of their plans. And there's no way they would part with them. Like Zach Neto, like we're not getting Zach Neto in a Corbin Burns trade. That's their shortstop of
Hmm.
the future. We're not getting Reed Detmers in the trade. He's one of their core starting pitchers moving forward. So it's just a situation. Nolan Shanuel made the majors right after being drafted. Like he's not getting traded. So those are the three guys that I would probably have some interest in, and there's no way they're moving them for Burns. So I think they probably just reached out to see if there was any way they could steal him from us. And the Brewers aren't the stupid team in that situation. That would be the Angels. So I just don't see anything happening there. But I guess kind of along those lines, Tyler Glasnow trade just became official not too long ago, or very close to official. Jeff Passan tweeted it, which means it's very close to official. And he's going to the Dodgers, which was kind of a team that we all had earmarked as a potential Burns destination. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look. Are there any other teams that you specifically think are going to be? We've talked about the Orioles and stuff in the past.
Hmm.
Is there any other team that you would see as like a good fit and potentially still interested in going after Corbin beyond the Dodgers?
That's where it's tough. I usually kick it out to you and I go, so the Blue Jays, they're willing to spend money. What do the prospects look like? And then you're like, well, they don't look great again. What a couple of guys I would like, but it's like that's kind of now the game that we're playing. And I wonder if and rightfully so, I wonder now where, like I said, I rather would have traded him last year. So are people saying that our price tag might be a little bit too high now because if the Dodgers are kind of being like, all right, we'll move on if that door closes, then I'm kind of like, oh crap, like what what else is there left? And now we're stuck with them. And I wonder if that's a lot of why Matt Arnold's been saying like we're fine with keeping him. Like he's just a really good pitcher. Like I wonder if he's just like praying that somebody comes and just like we're gonna keep him. So you better take him away from us, or you're gonna lose
Oh
out on
yeah,
him.
that's
Um,
100% part of it for sure.
yeah, and like I said, you just have to look at the teams that now I guess that Shohei's official. I guess now you gotta look at those teams that were willing to spend and willing to want to bring him in. Um, the Cubs, maybe I don't know. Like I don't know if that's a team that maybe they got out of the Shohei business pretty early, and I know that maybe there was rumors of him maybe going there or something. I don't know, but um, again, it's that plus mixed with how much do we want back from him, and we want a lot back from him, but people are probably saying if they can, going back to maybe that Shohei conversation, if we can just pay him in a year and we can beat you to paying him clearly if we're the Brewers, then maybe we can just wait out a year. So now it's just a tough mix. But yeah, I mean, I didn't really consider the Angels either. I didn't really think about the team that lost Shohei would be wanting a pitcher. I guess I should have considered that. But yeah, that just seems like a team that's panicking, trying to be
Yes.
like, oh no, our fans don't like us now because we don't have Shohei. So look at we're trying to get Corbin Burns.
Always assume that the Angels are panicking. That's usually the case.
Yeah. But
They
I think I am scared that the might be out of the Corbin Bird sweepstakes. That to me is a little bit of a scarier possibility.
Yeah.
Um, Now I don't think that necessarily means that because they got Tyler Glasnow that they won't take Corbin Burns. That's still a possibility. I'm sure it's the Dodgers. Um, but you had a great point too of I didn't really consider the fact that those two threads could be tied together with seeing what Tyler Glasnow pulled in versus what we could potentially get for like Corbin Burns because
Yeah.
they got similar talent and but I didn't really consider it because Tyler's injuries and things like that. I guess I just figured that Corbin was going to be worth more and I didn't really consider that. But it's a good point because they are on paper, they are very similar. Um, and that's to me, whatever they got for him, that's kind of like the floor, I guess, is what I'm looking at. Or at
Yeah.
least somewhere in that ballpark at the very least. That's what kind of I'd expect from a Corbin Burns package.
Yeah. And I do know that Passan said today that he's going to be extending with the Dodgers once he gets there, which to me probably added a lot of value to that trade package
Hmm.
because he said that the trade is dependent on that being agreed upon. So I
Corbin
guess
likes LA. He would extend, so what's the problem?
yeah. Well, I think the Dodgers probably will still be in it if they miss out on Yamamoto, but I have a feeling that's where he's going to end up too. So I don't know that they're going to be in it. But yeah, another team. I was actually talking about it with Jack Stern the other day, and another team that we could see jumping in was the Rangers. But then, of course, they went out and signed Tyler Mahle today. So he's injured for part of this year. So who knows? Maybe they would still go after Burns for 1 year and then be willing to have Mahle next year and move forward
Hmm.
with, DeGrom and Scherzer kind of. And yeah, they could use starters still, I suppose. So maybe the Rangers would still be in it now that I'm thinking about it. But
The thing about it too is I'm thinking more in NBA terms, maybe a little bit different trades, but like the benefit of somebody grabbing him, I think also there's a benefit to taking him with a year left because you're getting the first crack at that extension talks with
yep,
him versus like you waiting back and leaving it to chance where you're one of 10 teams, 15 teams that want him. So I guess to make us feel better, that could be a reason why people want to have him right now
yeah,
is because you get that first crack.
yeah. No, I was actually going to say that too. I think even if you don't extend him, there's a familiarity there, and if you did well and he liked his
Mhm.
time there, it's at least going to give you a nice step up when you move into the free agent discussion. So I think that is definitely the case. And now that we've moved past all of our current and possible trades, we will jump into we're going to talk about not all of, but our top 10-ish notable offseason trades the Brewers have made in the past. So starting off with I think this is an obvious number one for most Brewer fans who know a decent amount about the history of the Brewers, but the number one trade we had on here is when the Brewers acquired Raleigh Fingers, Pete Vukovich, and Ted Simmons from St. Louis, and they gave up Sixto Lezcano, David Green, Larry Sorensen, and Dave Lapointe. So Lezcano had a really solid career, but he actually did a lot of his best. He played a lot of his best baseball in Milwaukee, but he had a good career. He's one of my dad's favorite players, so I've learned a lot about Sixto Lezcano over the course of my life. But I was looking into the other three a little bit, and I did see that Larry Sorensen actually has had a very interesting life. Not necessarily, he had an okay career, like not a bad career, but he has been in prison. He had like 6 or 7 DUIs. He was part of a massive case for cocaine abuse in the late 80s. And but he kind of it's cool because he turned his life around and he's actually been announcing for he did
That
some
was
announce
that was so dark to start out with. Then
I
you're like, but
know.
actually,
Well, I tried to bring it around. It was a
he
happy
survived.
ending.
Actually,
No, he's been doing announcing since he got out of jail technically, but he now he works for Wake Forest. He does baseball games, he does some football games, and he's a radio guy, but he's done some TV and stuff, like turned his life around, got himself on track. So that was cool to see, but I just didn't know anything about him beforehand. And so I looked him up and that was not expecting to see all of that. But obviously, in terms of the Brewers' return on that, and I mean, Raleigh Fingers and Ted Simmons, both Hall of Famers. Pete Vukovich won a Cy Young. Raleigh won a Cy Young and an MVP as a reliever, which is absurd. And just, I mean, an incredible haul in one trade to end up with that much. All three guys having huge seasons or huge careers or just being extremely important parts of that 1982 team, which of course somehow still lost to the Cardinals, who gave all three of them to the Brewers at that time. But this was before our time. We didn't witness this and we don't know that much about these guys in terms of like, we don't remember how it looked when they were playing, but I do think it's pretty hard to argue with that being the best trade the Brewers have ever made during an offseason when you acquire two Hall of Famers and the other guy you acquired won a Cy Young for the Brewers. So that's our number one. But number two, I think we both have a little bit more uh, of a memory of, and that is the Yelich deal, acquiring him from the Marlins for Lewis Brinson, Monte Harrison, Jordan Yamamoto, and Isan Diaz, all of whom are either kind of career minor leaguers at this point or playing overseas. And I believe Yamamoto might actually be retired. It's just in terms of pure, just an absolute steal of a trade. You couldn't really find one that was a bigger steal than this one. I mean, Yelich, obviously, we got the 2018 MVP, the 2019 almost MVP, and would have been MVP if he didn't get hurt. And then he signed an extension. And I know the extension, there's a lot of back and forth on whether that was worth it. We talked about it already, but it was a guy who was coming off superstar seasons who wanted to stay in Milwaukee. And at the time, it was seen as a pretty good deal for the Brewers. So no matter what happens moving forward, it'd be pretty hard to argue with the success of the trade itself. But Gunnar, what was your, I guess, your reaction and your thoughts when that first went down? That whole day was pretty exciting.
yeah, that was an iconic day. Um, and I guess we'll leave that for next episode, but we'll preview the other half of that day and the next episode. But yeah, it's funny looking back at it because obviously we completely fleeced them. Um, and I remember us when the trade broke, we were like, at least we have Monte Harrison. If we, not that we love Lewis Brinson, but like that he was a type of Lewis Brinson type of guy, and we were still happy with the trade. Like we didn't really care even
I was
then,
thrilled.
but yeah, and that was probably more me being like, well, I like Yelich, but at least worst case we have Monte Harrison. And then all of a sudden it came in at the very end that it was Monte Harrison too. Like, crap, wow, we got, and I like the San Diaz too. So I was actually probably the biggest fan of him out of that group. Um, Especially after Lewis Brinson's small run with us, I wasn't very excited about him, but I thought he would be a solid player, and he ended up being just unfortunately nothing. But um, probably a great guy. So he can't. Maybe he can come and revamp his career with the Brewers. But yeah, I just remember that day obviously being super fun in general, and you touched on like the Yelich contract and everything, and people forget about his big injury that he had too. So he's had extreme highs and extreme lows here, and he's been able to kind of build himself back up to an all-star player. So um, he is the face of the franchise too, which is not rare to pick up in a trade, but I mean, it is pretty rare to have that type of guy and get him young like that, and now to be able to keep him around for a decade plus if everything works out. So um, the successor to Ryan Braun we were able to acquire. So um, yeah, I mean, I for us, like you said, this is probably our number one since that was like our Raleigh Fingers type of trade. But we got to pay respect to as a whole. This was number two, so it'll have to live at number two.
Yeah. And yeah, I've told my Yelich story before on the podcast, but arguably the most excited I've ever been about a move before I heard what we gave up or anything. I was so excited that we got Christian Yelich. Favorite player on a different team, now on my team. Great. Super cool. Basically my Dame Lillard trade for the Brewers. But we'll move on to number three, another one we are not going to have any personal experience with, but another one that played a really big role on that 82 team, and that is Cecil Cooper being acquired from Boston for George Scott and Bernie Carbo. I mean, I know George Scott was a solid player. I don't know anything about Carbo, to be honest with you, but Cooper was a huge, huge piece of that 82 team and the 81 team that was good. But he had the super famous hit against the Angels where you can see him throwing his arms down to tell the ball to get down. And then you got the guy, I can't now I'm getting into a zone where I can't talk about things I didn't see, but it's just a very cool moment. Obviously, most Brewer fans have seen the video of him doing that and throwing his arms down, like get down, and then the go ahead run scoring. It's if you look back, like he just was so solid. He was such a solid player, and
Consistent.
yeah, super consistent. And then he obviously had a really high baseball IQ too, because he did go on to manage in MLB and he was a longtime coach. So I think it was just one of those guys that was kind of he kind of was the glue for that team. I think a lot of people would describe him that way. And to give up a guy that George Scott was solid and all that, but they got him for a pretty reasonable price and he turned out to be so important. So we put him third. Fourth, we have a little bit more we can talk about again, which is the JJ Hardy trade. And I remember, I can tell you this, I was not happy at the time of that trade, and I was not happy the first couple years after that trade. Obviously, of course, for those who don't know, JJ Hardy to Minnesota for Carlos Gomez. I can tell you right now that for the first 2 years that Carlos Gomez was a Brewer, I hated him. I could not stand him. He made so many stupid mistakes. He was constantly getting himself out on the bases. He was a good defender, but he also wasn't hitting for power at that time. And then he did start taking huge hacks before he actually started hitting the ball. He was already doing that. And he was just, for me, at that time, I probably would have appreciated him more now, but as a kid who was kind of like a slappy type hitter at the time, watching him swing out of his shoes and hit like 5 homers a season those first couple of years was like, why is he doing this? What is the point of this? In the end, we all know that Carlos Gomez ended up being very, very good for the Brewers, and we'll get into it in a minute, but he also has contributed quite a bit in kind of a backwards way to the current roster and the future of the Brewers. So, Gunnar, let's talk first. I mean, your thoughts about Gomez at the time when he was on the Brewers, and then maybe as he started becoming an actual all-star level player.
Mm-hmm.
Probably, I don't know how you felt about him at first, but I was not a fan.
Yeah. Super weirdly enough, I actually did like him right away. And everything you said though is still 100% true when looking at Carlos Gomez. Like, I think I just like that type of guy because we never really had that type of guy, like an exciting player where I don't know, it's hard to find that in baseball where you get like an electric type of player like that. Um, and he was obviously able to kind of combine those powers with actual power and be actually a good player. So he kind of had a super good mix by the end of all of that. And the JJ Hardy part of that, I mean, JJ obviously was a super good player for us, but that last year he was not good at all. So I was more okay with getting rid of him at that point. Then of course JJ had a good career after that. So that sucked, but Carlos probably ended up eclipsing that anyways, so it didn't matter. But everyone remembers that 2011 when he scored the run. And then I just remember the back half of 2012. It had to be like the last 2 months or something when he started to figure it out. Like you could just see it, and that's when he had like 20 home runs ish, and it was just like, ooh, like he kind of like has all put it together now. It all kind of makes sense, like the whole package. And then he picked it up obviously the next 2 years, being literally an MVP consideration. Like he actually probably should have been higher than he actually got in votes. He was super. It's hard to say underrated when you're like getting MVP votes, but I actually still think he was underrated.
If the Brewers didn't fall off in 2014, he probably would have got more.
Yeah.
Them sucking ended up costing him a lot.
Yeah. And to speak to consistency, I mean, those 2-3 years, 2.5 years, he was very consistent for how it seemed like he wouldn't be a consistent player at that point. Obviously, he ended up not being super consistent, but with us Brewers wise, he was. And of course, when we traded him too, and you'll talk about the trade tree, which will lead us into this, but his like closing interview when he got traded was just, that was just awesome. And it was like awesome and obviously horrible at the same time because we're trading this guy who like loves the Brewers and cares so much about us and him just crying and stuff. I remember like literally crying listening to him talk. I'm like, this sucks.
I yeah,
And then that combined with the failed trade that he almost got traded for, just what a roller coaster of a week or a couple of days, I guess it probably was at that point. But yeah, I guess you can speak to that and then obviously tie it into the big trade tree that you
yeah,
got.
yeah. But you're right. I mean, I went back and listened. I searched for it a couple months ago. I don't remember. I think it was when Gomez came around for something at the park. And I went and looked for that interview because I remembered the exact same thing you did. And I just remember him talking about it being like the last practice he had in Milwaukee.
Hmm.
And just like his voice just went like he started crying like immediately. And of course, I started tearing up watching that now, 10 years after he got traded almost. And but like he was one of those guys who like you said, he loved Milwaukee. And to us, especially when we were younger, that was rare. Like when good players loved being here, that was very special for us. Like you could feel how cool that was. And he was a good player. He loved being here. He played his butt off every single day, which you don't get that from everyone. And yes, he made mistakes along with it. And that was part of why I didn't like him at first. But you learn to appreciate, like, okay, this dude is going as hard as he can every single play. And it rubbed people the wrong way on other teams at times. And he had one of our coolest, not really a brawl, but everyone remembers the Brian McCann situation at home plate with Carlos Gomez. But yeah, the day he was traded first to the Mets for Wilmer Flores and Zach Wheeler, and then Wilmer Flores cried. Speaking of crying, and then and then
In a
that gets
negative way.
yep, and then
I
that
mean, maybe.
gets knocked away. But that leads us right into like the four players that he ended up. The original trade, it was just Gomez for Wheeler and Flores, and then the second trade ended up packaging him and Mike Fiers. So Fiers and Gomez lead us to Adrian Hauser, Domingo Santana, Brett Phillips, and Josh Hader. We know what Hader did as a player for the Brewers. He won multiple reliever of the year awards. He was incredible. He struck out like two batters an inning for a couple years. He was able to go multi innings, like one of the best relievers you have ever seen. Ended up being part of that trade. Adrian Hauser is still going to be in the Brewers rotation this year, almost 9 years later, still sticking around, still helping the big league team and doing it at just like a really solid clip. He's nothing super special, but he's good enough to stick around in the majors and in a good rotation for this long. Domingo Santana gave us a couple good years, had the huge double in game 163 that he ended up coming around and scoring on. And Brett
Forgot
Phillips,
about that.
who,
That's a good point.
yeah, he that like end of the season, he kept pinch hitting and getting big hits. He was not playing at all,
Hmm.
but he just kept getting big hits and pinch hit spots. So that was that was cool to see from
And he
him.
had a good year even before that. I mean,
Yeah, oh yeah,
30 home runs. Like he was our best hitter that year in
yeah,
2017. So
yeah,
obviously didn't turn out that way, but after that, but yeah, he was our best hitter the year before. So
yeah. And then the fourth guy being Brett Phillips, who I mean, everybody loves Brett Phillips who watches baseball. Did I love him as an actual player? And do I love him as an actual player? No, I don't think he's close to perfect and he's got plenty of flaws. But as a person, like you do not find a better person in baseball than Brett Phillips. Like that is the guy you want kids to want to be like when they grow up. Like that
mhm.
dude is an awesome person. But guess to kind of extend the trade tree, then Phillips gets packaged with Jorge Lopez, who ended up he's had a solid career, but um, that brings in Mike Moustakas, who gave us a really good year and a half. Domingo gets sent out for Noah Zavales, who he hasn't turned. He got released last year at one point, and then Ben Gamel, who gave us, I mean, decent fourth outfield type, nothing
Mhm.
special, but good dude, played hard. We talked about Hauser still in the organization, but then the Josh Hader trade, which I'm sure everyone knows all the details of the Josh Hader trade, but just to remind everyone, the main piece, the guy who is still in the organization right now, is Robert Gasser probably a top five-ish prospect for the Brewers and somebody who's going to make starts for the Brewers unless he's hurt at some point this year. They got Taylor Rogers, who did not work out how they had planned, but I will remind everybody that he had better numbers than Josh Hader the rest of the season after the trade. And then to Nelson Lamet, who was really, I mean, they cut him the next day. So there was
Yeah.
nothing there. And we'll say it, I mean, he did okay with the Rockies, but he has been out of bait. I mean, he sucks. He's bad. They made the right call cutting him. I think they took him on just to help the return a little bit. But the fourth player in that trade was Esteury Ruiz, who he's kind of he actually kind of reminded me of like early Carlos Gomez, but you knew he wasn't ever actually going to bring as much power to the table.
Yeah.
But like super fast, decent outfielder, probably kind of dumb on the bases, had some potential at the plate, but maybe not a swing tailored for MLB pitching. Brewers end up moving him, and that's where the trade tree is currently sitting, but it sits in a really good spot because they got Yoel Payamps, who was one of the top three relievers last year, Justin Yeager, who's an interesting relief prospect, but the headliner being an all-star level catcher in William Contreras, who is locked in for a few more years now. And they got him for a guy that is, I mean, the A's can barely, even the A's are struggling to start Esteury Ruiz in the outfield right now. So um, I I think the biggest reason that this trade is as high as it is just because of this tree in general and what it's all
Hmm.
brought. I mean, if you just go down to the end of the tree right now, you got Adrian Hauser, Robert Gasser, Justin Yeager, Yoel Payamps, and William Contreras. All five guys who could impact the team, and for sure four guys who are going to impact this next year's team. And you got all-star seasons out of Gomez, and you got all-star seasons and reliever of the year awards out of Hader. Like you got solid seasons out of Santana, and you got nice returns on Brett Phillips. Like that trade tree has just grown into this really big part of what the Brewers have done the last like 6-7 years, and it all started with JJ Hardy for Carlos Gomez. So
I got one tidbit about JJ Hardy I should have mentioned. This just popped in my head. I did not have this planned at all. Do you remember when JJ Hardy, Bill Hall, Chris Capuano, and Jeff Suppan were on a soap opera
oh yes,
when they were on the Brewers? I
yep,
that just randomly popped in my head. I said it was that JJ Hardy in that group, and it was. So if you don't know, JJ Hardy was along with those guys on I think The Young and the Restless. I'm looking
yep,
it up right now.
yes, it
They
was.
had like a spot, and I remember thinking like, oh my God, the Brewers are. I never watched soap operas, obviously, I never have, but I was just like, oh my God, the Brewers are like we're like in Hollywood, we're acting like they care about the Milwaukee Brewers. Um, that was just a funny thing I remembered. I was just wondering if that was JJ Hardy, and sure enough, it was JJ Hardy in that group.
Yeah, and Hardy was absolutely like he was the first guy that every girl I knew, including my mom and my sister, was in love with on the Brewers. Every female person that I knew loved JJ Hardy, and he was their heartthrob. So they got that, and we got everything else that came with it after we traded him. But no, he did have a really good career. He actually made the Hall of Fame ballot for a year. Obviously, he wasn't
Oh
going to
yeah,
make the
yeah, you
Hall of
did.
Fame, but he had a good enough career to qualify for what it requires to make a Hall of Fame ballot. So that's pretty impressive. It was a good career.
Hmm.
Number five, we just talked about it, but I'll let you touch on kind of this one a little bit more. The Ruiz for
This is the
Contreras.
inverse. Yeah,
Yeah.
we got last year, obviously you touched on it, but William Contreras we acquired, and Joel Payamps and Justin Yeager just literally for Ruiz, which even at the time, like you said, we just do not understand how that was even possible. Even if you thought Contreras was just like a DH only, like that, oh, it's like okay, we can maybe go 1 for 1 there. Even then, we're like, oh, thank you, we'll take that. We didn't really like this guy that much, and then you add two guys who, one guy who has already impacted us in high leverage situations in the bullpen, and then another guy who could in the future. So it's to me, it was just this could honestly end up being higher if
Yeah.
he has the career that we think that he might have as a hitter, coming off the year where he was our best hitter, and then obviously now turning into a pretty solid catcher too, which we kind of figured what would happen with the Brewers when we just, along with the bullpen pitchers, we somehow had the secret magic to where if you got a glove and an arm, you can probably play catcher for us and be solid. So, um, like I said, this could end up being higher, and we love Williams. So,
Yeah.
um,
I would
just a
I would
home run
bet
of
it
a
will.
trade, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's top five after 1 year. That's pretty hard to do. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's, I think there's a pretty good chance it'll jump at least four and possibly three. One and two are going to be tough to crack. But if William ends up being like an MVP candidate at some point, never know. It could move its way up there. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good top five. Number six is probably going to be one that people might disagree with where I placed it. This was not Gunner's decision. I put it here. Um, the Zach Greinke trade. I have it sixth. Obviously, he went to from the Royals. He came from the Royals to Milwaukee for Alcides Escobar, Lorenzo Cain, Jeremy Jeffress, and Jake Odorizzi. So, I mean, off the top of your head, if you followed baseball for a while, you know that's four players who have been legitimately solid, if not better, MLB players. There's, I believe, Cain, Jeffress, and Odorizzi all made All-Star teams. I know Escobar did. He didn't deserve to make them, but he was on those
Nope.
teams as well. So I believe all four were All-Stars. Three of them probably deserving. Um, I was looking at the Greinke stats from 2011, and we started this, and I had him higher, and we had him higher, I should say. And I looked into it more, and I was just like, man, he just wasn't that great for the Brewers. And considering what they gave
Hmm.
up for him, it just didn't feel like it was actually, I mean, it was a good trade. It wasn't I would still say, like, going back in time, I understand, and I would probably make it again, even with hindsight. But the fact that he had it was a 3.84 ERA. Now his FIP was much lower, and he probably deserved better results than he got. But considering we're looking at a 1 year sample, in the end, the results are what matters. It's not like we're looking at him like, oh, he could be better because he had a lower FIP. Like, the results are what matters in that situation. You consider all four of them were all stars. And then you consider that Greinke had an ERA over 6 in his 3 playoff starts in 2011. And he did not, his best start, he allowed 2 earned runs, but he gave up 5 runs. 3 were unearned. So he kind of got destroyed in the playoffs. And Gunner, you can look at it from your point of view, because I know you would have had him higher, but that's how I looked at it. You can give me what you're thinking here.
Yeah. Well, as far as the play goes, we agree on that. Like that's where our Venn diagram sort of overlaps because we both think that he could have been better than he was. And like you said, maybe he should have been, but I remember in that winter meetings when we traded for him, I think that was winter meetings. I had to be right in the heart
It
of it.
was
I
very
feel like,
close, yeah.
yeah, because I remember like it being around that time. It might have been after. I don't know. I just remember them actually being at the winter meetings talking about it. It might have been after, but either way, just feeling about how big that trade was coming off of 2010, where we had the offense, even with like down years from Braun and quote unquote down years, those were still all-star years from Braun and Fielder. We had this huge offense and no pitching whatsoever. We had literally zero. Like Giovanni, but I mean everybody else was just like guys you were dying to replace. They weren't going to get you to the playoffs. So turning that over and turning that into a guy like Zach Greinke who won a Cy Young award. Um, Even before that, he was never really super consistent going up into that. He had like one breakout Cy Young award year, then obviously he was solid outside of that. Um, Really he became Zach Greinke after us, where he was super consistent and the low ERAs and just nasty. Um, but yeah, I mean for that aspect, this is where we sort of disagree. I just think he was valuable, I guess I could say where he how I look at it too, it's just like hindsight is 2020. So it's like you can say like, oh, he sucked in the playoffs, but it's like when you have like what's related to Corbin Burns this year, like would you not want Corbin Burns knowing like starting game one if like he like we know that Woodruff was out, so like who's gonna start game one? Corbin Burns. So it's like did he not do good? Yeah. But also it's just like well we had Corbin Burns starting, so it's just like yeah he didn't perform. I guess you have to look at it like two different ways because it's like what he was and what he was valuable for. I think he was higher up on the list, but that's also just is it just like a name purpose? Like is it because we got Zach Greinke? And then giving up four guys who you love Lorenzo Cain, so I that was probably hard for you.
Oh
Uh,
God, yeah. I mean,
I
I loved
didn't,
Kane at that time, and I really grew
yeah.
to love him over
Um,
time. But
and then
obviously, Jeffress
Escobar, I
ended up.
didn't like. Yeah, we got Jeffress
Jeffress
back.
was good with us. Like that didn't
Yeah,
matter really. He ended up being good with the Brewers, but
yeah, and I
Odorizzi
guess
turned into Will Myers for them. I know, or they
yeah, and he's a
no, they
solid
traded
starting
him.
pitcher.
sorry, they traded him and Myers for James Shields, who helped them win the World Series. But James Shields sucks. So
Do you just remember that stuff? That's just nasty, man.
yes, I do.
Because I know you didn't write that down.
No, that was top of the head. Um,
But yeah, I mean, I guess that where we don't agree, I guess, is the hindsight part where you can just say, "Oh, he didn't perform great." Where it's just
yeah,
like, yeah, he didn't, but he also was like, he was an all-star his second year, close to it, as close as you can get to an all-star. He was the second year with us.
yeah,
Um, and then, like I said, he didn't really become Zach Greinke, like the Greinke that we knew until after us on those Dodger teams. Um, so it's hard because I don't know. It's just, and speaking to that 2010 team, when you don't have any pitching, you're able just to throw a guy in there, like you said. We talked about it in text because we were arguing about it. Or yeah, maybe he was like technically your third or fourth best starter, but that's also valuable on that team because
yeah.
who else was gonna? And you could talk about Marco Estrada or whatever, but who was also very good. And solid, but like I just think coming off of that season, just throwing even like an average pitcher with plus potential, I think that makes it obviously a very good trade in. I guess I just view it differently, but we
Yeah.
agree that he could have been something a lot more.
No, I mean I agree with everything you said. I think it's more just like for me the five we have ahead of him are better trades than that. Like
Yeah,
I don't hate this trade. Like I said, I'd probably do it again, even with all the hindsight and everything. Like getting Zach Greinke was a big deal. Um, but the Zach Greinke trade is also a very good example of why the Brewers trading for all-in players can be dangerous, and it
that's a
did
good
set
point.
them
Yeah,
back for quite a while. Like they got a decent return with Segura in
but
the.
at that time too, losing Fielder that we knew we were going to lose
Oh yeah,
Fielder. If it's ever going to make sense, it made sense that year to do it. But yeah, this is exactly why you don't do that because then
yeah,
we're in a hole for years.
right. Well, and to me, this was why I didn't want them to do stuff like that with Burns running out soon and with Adamas, and like I didn't want them to go all in on that core because I like the next core too, and you
Mhm.
would be trading a good chunk of the next core probably to go all in, and that's exactly what happened in that one. But I mean, yeah, I think it's more just a matter of us. We agree on most of the same things. I think we just disagree slightly on where we would have ranked them, but it's not that big a
Yeah,
deal. The next one is a very big trade in terms of players. It's 9 players. It was the Richie Sexson trade to Arizona, which we also included Shane Nance and Nucci Varner, who was a player to be named later in the trade. Great name. Um,
yeah.
we acquired, I want to say Greg. I don't know. He's the manager of the Cubs now, I think. Um, we got Junior Spivey, Lyle Overbay, Chad Moeller, Jorge De La Rosa, and Chris Capuano. So for anybody who followed the Brewers, actually all 6 of those guys were legitimate MLB players, and most of them for the Brewers.
Hmm.
We know about Greg. Um, Junior Spivey was actually in the organization as a coach the last couple of years, but he I don't know if he left or if they let him go this offseason, but he's not part of the organization anymore. But he had a better career, or he had a better like prime that I thought he did when I looked back at him at one point. He made 2 all-star teams, which I did
Hmm.
not know. Overbay had a really, really fun 2004, and then yep, oh the doubles
I'm putting
machine.
the O up with my hands, by the way, for people who don't know.
He was, I mean, just an absolute doubles machine. Obviously, Prince Fielder was coming from first base soon, so they kind of knew he was probably more of a short term plug. And I actually didn't even look into it. I
Hmm.
don't know what we obviously traded him because he had control at the time. I have no idea what we got in return
Yeah,
for
the
him.
Blue Jays it had to be.
Yeah, but it couldn't have been anything of substance. Chad Moeller had a cycle with the flu. Um, he he was just a solid backup catcher. I mean, he wasn't anything super special, but pretty cool moment the cycle. Jorge De La Rosa didn't actually do that much for the Brewers, but he just stuck around in baseball for like a decade longer than I thought he was going to. He just kept pitching. I kept saying, "Oh, he's on the Rockies. Oh, he's on the Cubs. Oh, Jorge De La Rosa's pitching in 2018. Like, what is happening right now?" Um, he just kept pitching, and he had a really solid career. And then Chris Capuano, who he his All Star appearance was dumb, but he made an All Star team for the Brewers. He had an
He got
18.
a lot of wins.
Yes, he had 18 wins and not it was an ERA over 4, I believe. And even at the All-Star break, it wasn't like he was having that great of a season other than the wins, but good for him. He came back with Overbay kind of at the same time in that 2015 range where we were just picking through all of our old Brewers at that point and just trying to field a team. But all 6 of those guys just had good careers. I mean, Gunnar, I'm sure you have some memories of all of those guys. Richie Sexton, you could talk about Richie Sexton too.
Yeah. I was gonna say I was slightly too young for Richie Sexton, even though I feel like I remember him, but I don't. That's like my age. Like I feel like I do and I don't. And I obviously remember like all of his like I looked up all of his highlights. He seemed like a guy that I would like if you're listening to the podcast. That would be somebody I would want to keep. Um, which is weird. I don't know if he had like clubhouse issues. I don't know if he talked about like it was just weird how he seemed like a lot better player than what he actually stuck around for.
Yeah, there were rumors of him having some issues with tempers and not getting along with people.
Yeah, he just seemed like way too good to have like the career that he did, and he obviously had a good career. It just seemed like one of those where you have a high peak and then it just all of a sudden falls off, and it's like what happened. Um, I did look up who we traded for Overbay, another offseason trade, so at least it's on theme. But we traded him to the Blue Jays for Gabe Gross,
Oh,
Dave Bush, and Zach Johnson,
oh,
which
okay.
that was a solid trade. That could be in
That's
the
not a
honorable
bad
mention.
trade.
Yeah.
Because Johnson was part of the no wait, I'm thinking of Braddock, I think. Was he part of the CC trade? Or was that Zach Braddock?
You
That might have
can
been
search that
Braddock.
while I talk, yeah.
We'll move
But
forward. But Bush was solid for a while and
yeah,
Gabe Gross wasn't a terrible player.
Bush won the playoff game for us in
Yes, he
2008.
did.
Um, so that means he's better than CC Sabathia. But uh, no, I was a big Lyle Overbay fan. I literally still have a foul ball that Lyle Overbay hit that they gave to me when I was a fan. So I remember thinking like, oh my God, Lyle Overbay touched this ball with his bat, and I can never let this go. And I literally have never let it go. So he was a really good player. Then obviously we got him back later in his career. I don't remember what year that was. That 2014. That had to be actually.
It was 14 or 15.
2013. Yeah,
It
he
might have been
actually started
14.
out solid because
Yeah,
he
he had a
played a
really
lot more
good
than he
first
should
half.
have.
Yeah.
And then it's just he played a lot more than he should have, then he fell off.
It was the
Um,
same year Mark Reynolds and him were like sharing first base. So that
yeah,
was
that was
14.
2014 then.
Yeah.
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 So yeah, I mean, it's just really rare that you have that many guys who actually all make the MLB and play decent. Like they're all solid players. Like you said, I don't know who the great guy was, but sucked as a hitter and I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving on to another left-handed hitting first baseman that was also a Blue Jay at one point, Adam Lind. Um, but we're talking about the trade that we moved Adam Lind in, which
Yes.
we acquired all-star pitcher Carlos Herrera and Daniel Misaki, and then some bum named Freddie Peralta was kind of the third piece
Ugh.
as part of it. No, but Freddie was it was all 3 of them were just 19-year-old pitchers. And honestly, at the time, Freddie was viewed by most of like I remember when the trade broke and I was looking into it, like all the prospect people were like, Herrera's pretty interesting and Masaki's been hurt, but he's really interesting. And Freddie just kind of throws a straight fastball at like 88. And it was like, yeah, that's true. That's exactly what he did. And then he kept doing it and he kept throwing it a little bit harder every year. And then all of a sudden he had an okay slider, and then all of a sudden he was striking out 13 in his major league debut on Mother's Day, and we haven't really looked back from there because he's extended for a few more years. He's got a few more years on the deal. I mean, we all know Freddie Peralta is, for me, one of my favorites just because he kind of reminded me of like the baseball version of Giannis when he first came up, where he was just so wide-eyed and innocent, and you could tell he was super talented and just really, really happy to be there and super like family oriented and stuff. So he just reminded me of Giannis. He isn't the equivalent of Giannis as a pitcher, but he's a really good pitcher and a guy that I'm very happy is around for this next wave of guys too. So I don't know if you had any thoughts on that one. I know you liked Adam Lind. I liked Adam Lind too.
Yeah.
He had an underrated
Along
career.
the yeah, along those same lines of like a guy who had a huge peak and then just fell off at like a younger age, and you would think that was Adam Lind. So like we assumed that maybe he had an injury or something, but a really solid player for a long time. This is the type of trade that you being you would love this type like you this is the perfect type of trade for you where like the third guy in it becomes like an all-star pitcher that you discovered because you called it saying that he's gonna be this great pitcher. But yeah, I mean, that's honestly what you root for with like a rental is you can turn one of those back end guys into something, and this is literally best case scenario and those types
Yeah.
of trades. So, um, good player. It's funny if like Freddie didn't work out, that's probably not even that great of a trade. But the fact that Freddie worked out, it makes it like in our favor by a lot. So, and he was probably like you said, he was the most regarded. I wonder if he was like the quote like highest regarded like on like paper. Like was he like the top prospect out of all those guys? Probably not, even though he
No.
had the most interesting stuff. So
Yeah.
it's
I
just
mean,
cool to see that it all worked out. And then obviously I remember his Mother's Day performance. Like
yeah.
that's peak for Freddie Peralta. But yeah.
Yeah. I would be curious actually to know how the Brewers like would have rated them as they came in the
Yeah,
trade,
like
like
who's
who they
one, two,
viewed the
three.
highest. Yeah. It wouldn't shock me if he was third because, like I said, it was really just a fastball at the time of the trade. So, yeah,
Hmm.
that one was pretty good. And then, guess moving on to number 9, which was Tyler Thornburg going to Boston for Travis Shaw, Mauricio Dubon, and Josh Pennington. So, Gunnar, you can talk a little bit about Shaw because obviously I was a huge Shaw fan. I'm pretty sure you were a pretty big Shaw guy for at least a year or two there. So, yeah, you want to talk a little bit about him?
Yeah, I was a huge Shaw guy, and I was also a huge Thornburg guy, so I was kind of sad that we traded him. Uh, I remember his debut when he was, I think that was against the Cubs, maybe when he started, or I don't remember who it was against, but was it on ESPN too? I think it was like a big game. I don't know why. Maybe
It
I just thought it
was.
was a
I
big
think it
game.
was on ESPN.
And those are rare to come by too on top of it. Um, but God, I'm just a sicko for remembering that. Uh, but yeah, Travis Shaw was super, super underrated. And I talked about Domingo in that 2017 year being our best hitter. I mean, Travis was right up there with him too,
Yeah.
if he was not the best. So I kind of didn't forget about him. But um, he honestly, you could make an argument for one of the most underrated Brewers like ever. Like he had two like
Oh,
super
yeah.
good years,
His prime for
and
sure.
yeah, and I guess yeah, if you're comparing like 2 year sample sizes, like he would be up there, um, in the underrated category. And then of course that third year, I will never forget your tweet saying that you think he will be a, and I agreed with you. So like this is why I don't tweet hot takes like you do because then I'm wrong. But you said that he might be a top 10 uh MVP vote getter.
Oh, yeah.
I think that was the tweet. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that was
And
100% the tweet. Yes.
yeah, and he that's when he fell off quite a bit.
Uh-huh. Yep.
And yeah, I mean, throwing that away, he was a very good player for those 2 years, 17, 18. And then I think it was 19. I think I said 18. That was when he started up because I think his role, I think he could kind of sense that he was
Yep.
it just was diminishing for him for whatever reason, and he was already him switching over to second base and doing all that. Like he
Yeah.
just seemed like a great guy in that aspect. Like he was down for whatever. Like and that being a great hitter too is I loved him. So then Dubon I like too, and then obviously he's still a major league player, and then um turned that into Drew Pomerantz, who was an super good at again. That was a whole different type of trade. That's maybe we'll do that in during the year when it becomes July. But um as far as this value goes, I mean we killed that one. So we got him paid. So yeah, I mean you can speak to it again too.
Yeah. No, I just to touch on my tweet, I will say that the entire premise of that tweet was my hot takes for 2019. So it was meant to be
Uh
like predictions that would be cool if they came true, but I did genuinely think it was a real possibility that he could. I
yeah.
thought he was on the precipice of like a huge breakout offensively. That did not happen at all. So I very wrong on that one. And then, yeah, like you talked about with Dubon turning into Pomeranz. I mean, Pomeranz was he was probably our best reliever down the stretch of that season, and Hader was fantastic in the second half, but Pom was just incredible. He
Yeah.
was unbelievable. That was I remember we'll never remember or never forget Robert Murray saying Brewers have made a significant trade involving Mauricio Dubon, and then it was Ray Black and Drew Pomeranz, and everyone was like, "What?" But honestly, in the end, it proved to be more than fair value. I mean, Dubon's fine. He's
Hmm.
like you said, he's sticking around. He's on the Astros roster in the playoffs. Like a team that's trying to win World Series is rostering him in the playoffs, but he's just a utility guy. Like it's fine, but that's what he is. So to give him up and get a half year out of Pomeranz was great. And then I don't remember much about Pennington. I know he had a bunch of injuries and he had some decent stuff, but he just kind of fell off and he never could get healthy, if I remember right. So we'll move on to, at the time, one of the trades that kind of broke my heart before I knew who was coming back in the trade. I just remember we were at our family friend's house and my dad goes, I just heard on the radio the Brewers traded Scott Podsednik. And I was like, what? I was so mad in the moment. I didn't even know who was coming back. I didn't know anything. I just knew I had just lost one of my favorite players. In the end, it ended up being Podsednik and Luis Vizcaino, who I believe actually helped them a little bit also out of the pen, for Carlos Lee, El Caballo. Guy mashed. He was, I know you loved him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll let you talk about him. Well, how about you talk about Carlos Lee?
Even saying he mashed though, like it wasn't even as great as you would have thought. Like
Oh yeah.
I haven't even looked, but I just remember looking a while ago where it's like an high 800 OPS, low 900. Like he wasn't like in my head he was like 1100 like Yelich in 2018-19. Like he was just killing it. But yeah, I was a big El Caballo fan. Him and Jeff Jenkins, I was
Yeah.
extremely high on. I do remember like my family being big Scott Podsednik fans. They calling him like Scotty Poe and
Oh
his
yeah.
stolen bases and everything. Um, I think does he have the record for the Brewers, or was that doesn't he have some, like
If
some stolen base single
I
season?
believe he has the Brewers record, yeah.
Yeah,
If he
I mean
doesn't,
just
the R
crazy
is the one who
athlete.
passed it, but I'm pretty sure he does still.
Yeah. Oh yeah, wait, yeah, maybe he did pat. Yeah, I don't know, but um, we don't need to talk about Jonathan VR in this podcast. But uh, yeah, I mean, and then of course Scott got a World Series ring, so that's good for him.
What a walk-off homer.
Yeah, so he had uh,
He had one of the biggest
honestly,
moments.
yeah,
White Sox fans
so
like worship
huge
Scott
career.
Podsednik.
Yeah. So he had a actually really good career with, I think he had even had like a super good rookie season or something, or
Yeah.
quote rookie season with us. Like he seemed like he's going to be a lot better player than he was. But solid player. And like I said, I love Carlos Lee. Then we turned that into Coco Cordero, Kevin Mench, and Lance Nix. But don't forget about who else we sent in that trade as well, which was Nelson Cruz.
Oh yeah.
So just a small little package we gave him, and for Coco Cordero, who I love Coco Cordero, by the way,
Yep.
great closer, really good peak. Then of course went to the Reds too, which he hurt us there a little bit.
Yep.
Kevin Mench,
Biggest head in the world.
yeah, I think he was a top prospect
He was.
at one point, but yeah, I did not enjoy Kevin Mench. And then Lance Nix was also went to the Reds, but just huge. I've never seen a guy ever
Yeah.
in my life at that point as a baseball player who was just jacked. Uh, and I don't think I still have. Like I don't know how he got
He
that
was,
jacked.
yeah. That dude may
Um,
have been on the Mitchell report if he had been in the majors at the time that was going around. But
who's the guy right now in the Reds or was on the Reds who pitches and hits and he hit like a bunch of home runs against us?
Lorenzen, Michael Lorenzen.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
that was probably the next closest guy I could
Yeah.
think of who was like, uh, but yeah, funny trade. And like I said, I love Carlos Lee. So if it was my own personal favorites list, he'd be higher. But I understand.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't do it as much as a favorites, as much as a good
Yeah,
trade. It was meant to be how well they were actually worked out. But yeah, we had a bunch of honorable mentions. We are going way too long here, so we're gonna skip over those. But yeah, that's our top 10. I think all of them you could point to and kind of see how they shaped the current roster, other than obviously like the Cecil Cooper and Raleigh Fingers trades, like those
yeah,
didn't shape the current one. But even going back to like Carlos Lee and Nelson Cruz being part of that, like Cruz could have been a part of the Brewers franchise for a long time if he was not moved in that deal, and you never know what that affects. So I always
yeah.
like
And
looking back
the
at these.
point of this, yeah, the point of this exercise was to show that these are some big names being moved around in the offseason, and we're obviously anticipating some of these bigger trades maybe happening with our guys. So who knows what that can turn into. So that was
Yeah.
the point of this, to show that big moves can still be had,
Oh yeah.
even in the offseason.
Well, and not even that, but sometimes they're not as big as you think they end up being.
Yeah,
Like at the time, like Adam Lind for
true.
Freddie, and even the Thornburg trade. Like no one saw Travis Shaw having that good of a peak, or they would not have moved him for a reliever. Like it was just,
Hmm.
these types of moves can have a big trickle effect, like we showed with the trade tree for Carlos Gomez. So a lot of things where maybe you aren't super excited at first, but just keep in mind that the Brewers are going to make moves, and I'm sure they still have moves on the table here. Wouldn't be surprised to see something somewhat big at some point, like Gunnar said. So we got one other Twitter question from our good friend Cal Doby, who I'm going to shout out. Although, man, now I have to look up their podcast name, but I'll give them a shout out. Cal Doby asked us. I'll read the question in the meantime. He said, "Do the Brewers need to hire a third hitting coach?" This was obviously a joke, but people love to make their jokes about how big the Brewers coaching staff is becoming, and it's becoming really big. Like, they keep adding to it this offseason. It's gotten much bigger. They're giving different roles and everything to everybody. To me, there is a limit to where too many cooks in the kitchen, and guys, it's pretty hard to keep everyone on the same page. But when you feel like you have a really good team of coaches and you feel like you can put them in roles where they're going to help your team, I don't think you ever can technically have too many coaches as long as they are all pulling the right direction, or the same direction, I should say. And that doesn't mean they don't have different opinions and they're not challenging each other and disagreeing on stuff, but they all have to pull the same direction and have the same end goals and kind of the same philosophies that they're teaching. At least that's where it can get dangerous, is if you have three hitting coaches and one of them's like, we're going to be a ground ball team now, or one of them's like, we're going to try to be opposite field all the time, and I don't want you guys pulling stuff unless you absolutely have to. And one guy's like, no, we're going to lift and separate, and we're trying to hit bombs every time. Like, then you're going to run into problems because you're getting all this different information from different coaches. But I know it's a joke, Cal, but I did want to touch on, like, these growing coaching staffs are for a reason, and a third hitting coach could help the Brewers. So if they went out and did it, I wouldn't be upset that they did it, as long as it made some sense and they could make it work internally. So that's my question for you, and his podcast, or my answer for you. And his podcast name is Cheesehead Chatter, and the @ on Twitter is cheese, spelled CHZ, and then head chatter. So the only difference is cheese is spelled CHZ. But yeah, give them a look. It's four good guys. I don't know AJ. I know him from Twitter, but I know Gabe and Jacob from just kind of over the years, and I know Cal really well from coaching him and him playing with my brother. So good guys. I haven't actually had a chance to listen to it myself, but I'm going to give it a great review right now. It's probably good. And then we'll just wrap it up with a couple little odds and ends type things here. The Australian Winter League is going on. The Brewers have three guys there: Sam Gardner, Taden Hall, and Brian Fitzpatrick. Gardner, well, I'll start with Taden Hall because I talked about him on our podcast, or our prospect episode, and talked about how he does a lot of things well, but he hasn't really shown any power yet. And he had his first professional home run. It was a grand slam. His OPS is only 710, but he had a really, really slow start, and he's been good for the last couple of weeks. He struck out more than usual at first, and then he kind of adjusted. But it was good to see some power more than anything from him. And then there's Sam Gardner, who is just having one of the most absurd runs I've ever seen from any pitcher at any level. He has a .29 whip right now. He is striking out almost 23 batters per 9 innings. He has only allowed 3 base runners. He struck out 8 in his last performance. And it's 10 in the third innings, 2 walks, 26 strikeouts. So that's ridiculous. He's topping out at 97, and I watched him a decent amount with the Timber Rattlers this year, because of course I did. And he was sitting like 93, 94 most of the time. Had a really good ride at the top of the zone, so it was an interesting fastball to begin with. But if he's getting up towards 97, I mean, that'd be pretty intriguing to me. And then the breaking ball is a pitch he throws like as his primary. His curveball is really, really good, and it looked like he was throwing a slider now in Australia too. So I don't know, man, but he was another independent ball pickup who was just dominating that Australian league. And never know, maybe he's, like I said with Ryan Brady, the Brewers find these guys everywhere, and maybe Gardner's one of the guys they found on the indie ball circuit and can turn into a helpful major league reliever. And then the last guy, Brian Fitzpatrick, he has an ERA just over 2. He was a pick 2 drafts ago, kind of a tall lefty. He's just like low 90s, pretty decent changeup, okay command. I mean, honestly, I'm not a huge fan of his, but it's nice to see him getting good results. He's striking out about a batter an inning and a 2 ERA in Australia. So all three showing pretty good signs. I did want we'll go into our random Brewers to finish this one out. So Gunnar, go ahead with your pick.
I'll make it quick. I picked Mitch Stetter. Um, I not a huge memory of. I mean, I have a big memory of Mitch Stetter, of course, but nothing like he wasn't an amazing pitcher, like or anything like that. But he was the OG Josh Hader. Uh, and I did not throw left-handed, but I would constantly mock him and mock his wind up that he did and how he threw because I thought it was hilarious. So, yeah, shout out to Mitch Stetter and. We don't forget you, and you were, like I said, the OG Josh Hader. So,
Yep.
yeah, that's something.
Yes, it is. My pick, I actually used an immaculate grid today. It is Mike Rivera. He
Ooh,
was a backup catcher for a few years for the Brewers. For some reason, I don't think I ever watched a game he played in that he didn't hit a home run. He just seemed to hit a home run every time I watched him. So my memory of him is like some monster that probably should have been starting all the time, and he wasn't. Um, if you look at the numbers, that is not what he was, but he did have some pop, and he was definitely a decent backup catcher. But yeah, used him in my Detroit Tigers and at least one game at catcher spot on the immaculate grid today. For some reason, he popped into my head right
nasty.
away. So 0.003%, no big deal. But no, I did actually love Mike Rivera. That's why I remembered him in that situation. So he's my pick. And I think with that, we'll close it out. We have had a long night of podcasting here, Gunnar, but for those of you who are listening and hopefully listen to both the Bucks and the Brewers pod, please like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. Remember to follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod. And to touch on that actually a little bit, it would be super helpful if people followed on there. We are trying to make that a little bit more of we're going to try and be more active on that account. I'm hoping to move it away from my account more, but for now, people see it more on my account. So that's why I've been tweeting from there. So if you could give us a follow and potentially retweet some of our tweets, that would be fantastic. And then, as always, please feel free to leave feedback for us on how we can get better. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time.
See ya.